I've spoken with people who think that they are no longer permanent residents. And the reasons they've given me range from, well, I lost my green card 10 years ago. Life got crazy. I never renewed it. So I need to reapply for a green card through a new marriage. Or I've left the US for a while and I didn't re-enter the US. So I'm no longer a permanent resident. And some of these are true, some of them are not true. The purpose of this video is to discuss the 3 ways you actually lose your permanent residence, such that you need to reapply for permanent residence, a green card in the future. The first thing I want to discuss is whether you lose your permanent residence by not renewing your green card if you're living in the United States. So the answer is emphatically no. You do not lose your permanent residence even if you lost your green card 10 years ago if you're living in the United States. You just apply to renew the green card. Even if it was a really long time ago, doesn't matter. You just file an I-90 form and you'll get a new green card in the mail. There are just 3 ways that you can actually lose your permanent residence where you need to find a new pathway to become a permanent resident in the US. The first one is voluntary abandonment. The second one is a deportation order by an immigration judge. And the third one is abandonment by leaving the US for too long. And we're going to discuss each of these in detail. Voluntary abandonment of residency and leaving the US for too long can be related, but not always. So the general rule is if you intend to leave the US for more than 1 year at a time, then there is a presumption of abandonment when you come back. But that presumption can be overcome. For example, if you leave and you go to Iran and you're imprisoned, but you intended to come back a few months later, but the Iranian government imprisons you and you spent 5 years there as a permanent resident, you come back, you are still a permanent resident of the US. And the reason I give this specific example is because there's a court case directly on point here where an Iranian went to Iran. They were imprisoned for several years. They didn't plan on spending several years. They just went there for a funeral. And when they tried coming back, Customs and Border Protection tried to take away their green card and place them into removal proceedings. An immigration judge determined that the immigrant, the permanent resident, did not intend to live outside of the US for longer than 1 year, and therefore is still a permanent resident. So the key here is that it's all about your intention. If you intend to live outside of the US continuously for more than 1 year without first applying for a re-entry permit, which is a whole different topic, then there's a presumption of abandonment and you may have problems when you try to come back to the US. Now, how would that play out? When you come back to the US, Customs and Border Protection will pull you to the side. They'll bring you to a back room. It's called secondary inspection. And they'll interrogate you. They'll ask you, where were you working? Where were you living? Where were you receiving mail? Why were you outside of the US for so long? What was your intent? And based on your questions and your answers, they may place you into removal proceedings so that an immigration judge can determine what actually was your intent after going to several hearings and a full trial play out. Another thing Customs and Border Protection might do is to try to get you to sign an I-407 saying, hey, you abandoned it. Make it easy on yourself and just sign this form and you might be able to get your green card back in the future. I would generally advise against this, or at least speak with an immigration lawyer before you ever sign an I-407 voluntary abandonment form, because once you abandon your residency, it's not guaranteed you'll ever become a permanent resident again, regardless of what Customs and Border Protection tells you. On the side note, I've seen situations where people have voluntarily filed an I-407. One specific case comes to mind where someone was moving to Europe and they made a lot of money, like $500,000 a year, and they were going to get taxed very heavily by the US government on a large portion of that income. So they filed an I-407, voluntary abandonment, and they gave up their permanent residence because they didn't want to be taxed on that ever again. So we've discussed voluntarily abandoning your residency. We've discussed leaving the US for longer than a year with the intent to live outside of the US. But what we haven't discussed is an immigration judge ordering you deported from the United States. And these topics can be related. For example, if you leave the US for several years and your plan was just to live in a different country, no one was holding a gun to your head, that was just your plan all along, and you come back, Customs and Border Protection will interrogate you, and they can place you into deportation proceedings where an immigration judge might eventually order you deported, at which point you're no longer a permanent resident, you no longer have a green card. But even if you don't leave the US, there are other ways you can be ordered deported. And one of the clearest examples that I'll discuss is criminal convictions. So if you're convicted of certain offenses within the first few years of getting your green card, or other offenses later on, you can get deported from the United States. And by deported, what I really mean is a deportation order, which means you no longer have your permanent residency. Another way you can easily be placed into removal proceedings and ordered removed from the US and lose your green card is if you fail to properly remove conditions on your residency. What that means is you've married a US citizen, your marriage is fairly recent, you get your green card, and it's a 2-year conditional green card, and you don't apply to remove the conditions. In that case, you will be placed into removal proceedings most likely, and if you don't remedy the situation, you'll be ordered removed from the US and you'll lose your residency. Now that you are an expert on the ways in which you lose your permanent residency, let me know if you have any questions or if I missed anything in this video. If there are similar topics you want me to discuss, put them in the comments below. If you're dealing with a situation where you've received a notice to appear in immigration court, or you're not sure if you're a permanent resident anymore, you can always schedule a consultation directly with me. The information is in the video description below. Again, guys, I'm Puyandarian, an immigration lawyer. I put out a video like this every week, and I'll see you guys next week.